noon. It's usually morning when I do this. Welcome back to Dela's Voice, everyone. Today I'm chatting with Donald Shields, psychotherapist, chaplain, and grief counselor at Stouffville Hospital. And I want to welcome you here, Don.
I'm glad to be here.
Thank you so much for coming all this way from your home. I know it took a while.
Well, it's fine.
But you had company.
I did.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
So this is my set at my flower shop.
Okay.
Pretty good, right?
It is. I love flowers.
Yeah.
Plants. One of the New Year's resolutions that I provided with people is to buy a plant.
For themselves?
For themselves.
How come?
Because plants give us a touch point with nature.
I understand.
So buy a new plant is a good way to start the new year.
You hear that, everybody? Come to Flowers and Things and buy yourself a plant. Yes, I believe that. I actually feel like the air in here is really nice all the time.
Plants connect us. They ground us. That's why we love going to tropical climates and that, because you have a sense of nature, you have a sense of beauty.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. So, and you like orchids?
I do.
You just said that too.
I love orchids.
Yeah.
Actually, my favorite orchids is I was down in Cuba, and I went to the compound of, oh my goodness, the American writer that lived in Cuba.
Hemingway.
Ernest Hemingway's compound, and I actually got to see wild orchids all around this property.
Oh, nice.
Growing on the trees, and it was really cool.
And you just came back from Portugal.
I just came back from Portugal.
What'd you think?
Love Lisbon. It is a place everybody should visit at least once. Yeah.
I was there a long time ago when I was a kid.
Oh, Lisbon's gorgeous.
Yeah, I have good memories of that place.
Yeah.
And so, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you as well.
Any New Year's resolution for you?
To read a book a month.
Oh, that's so good.
Yeah. I used to read profoundly, and I find that when you're looking through Facebook, when you're looking through Instagram and that, you can travel so many leads on the spider web that you can spend time just reading little tidbits but never really reading through something. So I want to read a book.
You're so right. That's on my bucket list, to read a book per month.
Yeah.
One day.
Yeah.
I'll do that. So the reason we want to talk about grief today, I think it's due to what's been happening lately.
Yeah.
And it hit us all in a really strong way. And I thought that if we can just bring a little bit more awareness, a little bit more information and knowledge to really what grief is actually, and how we can deal with it. How do people deal with it in general? How can we bring a little bit more control so that it doesn't paralyze our lives in a sense? So, are you good with that?
Yep.
Okay. So my first question, if you don't mind, is to ask you, what is the definition of grief in a way everybody could understand?
So grief is really the psychological, that means our mental capacity, and the physiological, the feelings that we have and the stuff that goes on within our body in response to a loss. So you could have brain fog, you can cry, you can be in shock, you can laugh, you may have diarrhea, you may have stomach aches, you may have aches and pains in your body, you may feel depressed and want to lay under the covers, but it's really the way that our mind and our body respond to a loss.
It's so different for everybody.
Each person there's no one way to grieve. Each person responds differently.
Okay. I'm thinking now with all these different ways people show grief. We're all so different.
We are. And what happened in Western culture is we had Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and she had the 5 stages of grief. And when Kubler-Ross did her research for the 5 stages of grief, she never meant for grief to be linear. So you start with denial, you start acceptance, like all these various stages that Kubler-Ross had. what she did is she identified some things that are common to most people. So that would be denial, acceptance, bargaining, hopefully getting to a place where you embrace the situation and you move on. But not all of us get there, and it's not all linear, and one doesn't follow the other. So to push on people that they should be in acceptance, or they should be moving on, or they should be doing this, no, grief has its own stages based on the person that's grieving.
Yeah, and I can see how a person can really deal with their grief in 1 month, and another person is grieving for a lifetime.
Do you know what? I don't think anyone is ever going to deal with their grief in a month. Mm-hmm. Can they get back to being a functioning human being in a month? Yep. But I think that the difficulty is we live in this society that wants closure. And I want to talk about the myth of closure. Closure does not exist. Closure is great when you're closing on a house or buying a car and you close a deal. But when it comes to life, if we've committed ourselves to something, to a relationship, to a person, to a job, to a lifestyle, and then all of a sudden things unravel, it's not going to be very easy to all of a sudden put that away and then begin life again. The real aspect of grief is to learn about integration. How do you integrate that loss into your life so that you can carry on and it becomes part of your story? If my wife were to pass away, do I just all of a sudden close that hole as she never existed and then move on in life? Of course not. I would, even if I move on in relationships or anything else, I would still have that memory and those experiences of having had a multi-year relationship with a human being. Mm-hmm. So it's how do we integrate those experiences for ourselves and allow them to be part of our story, to write them into our story, but to continually have an open-ended story that we can move on.
What do you think if, right here, is it appropriate to go through the 5 stages of grief? Because I thought they were really interesting. So the 5 stages of grief are denial.
Denial.
Yes. So
bargaining.
Can you, like, just one sentence?
This can't be happening.
This can't be happening.
This can happen. It's not true. No. And you often see that when someone's been told that a loved one has died in an accident, or there's been a plane crash or a disaster, and the person says, no, that's not true, you're lying. Mm-hmm. So it's that whole sense of denial. The body just shoots out adrenaline and cortisol, and you just say, no, that's not true. Mm-hmm. Then there's a sense of bargaining. Well, if I did this or if I do this, maybe things will change. Then there's
acceptance, you said.
Acceptance is the last one.
Oh,
so there's
okay.
Bargaining, denial. Oh my goodness.
Oh, did I just, you just said them.
Okay, denial, bargaining, acceptance. There's a sense of almost relief, or, this is going to be it.
For me.
Yeah, like just a relief. I'm done. That's it.
I give up.
And and then that whole sense of acceptance that, life will move on, or perhaps I can live through this experience or live whatever it might be. And I mean, there's various types of grief. There's a grief when you get a diagnosis. There's a grief when you're told that you have, 4 months to live or 6 months to live because of cancer. The one that I know you wanted to talk about today is the vicarious trauma, or the grief that we experience when we talk about world events.
Yes.
The Ukrainian aircraft that was shot down in Iran affected everybody. We've had memorial services across Canada, across the Ukraine, across areas, and people feel paralyzed by this tremendous loss of people. And what do? How do you respond to it? How are you supposed to feel? And it's okay to feel sad. It's okay to feel that the world may seem like it's out of control. But I mean, is this any different than the Crusades or some of the other events that have happened in world history? Of course not. It's just that we hear about them more readily, and the images are much more profound. Certainly your listeners will remember the image about a year and a half ago, of the young person that was on the coast of Turkey, the little boy face down in the water.
Yes, that was an image that's
a tremendous image.
Yes.
And you look at it and you feel helpless for this little child. Yet, if you recognize that there's many in the North American community that have sponsored Syrian refugees, and refugees continue to come over, but there's a sense of helplessness because the issue is so big. And in reality, all we can do is a small part. So if it means writing your prime minister and saying, this is not right, if it means writing the United Nations, if it means saying that we need more freedom in the world, those are things that we can talk about. But I can't change the fact that bad things are going to happen.
So when the aircraft was shot, I know that in the Iranian community there was a lot of grief. There still is, as you said, as you mentioned. For me, it brought up a lot of questions. So I started questioning things. Why? Like you said, right? Why? What does this mean? I think I tried to make sense of it. I'm sure a lot of people did. And so, can you talk about that? Can you maybe talk about how can we deal with those questions?
I think we're all meaning-making organisms. We want to be able to associate things with something else. So if you look at primal human beings, if they seem to have done all the right things and the crop grows, then the gods were wonderful with them. If there was a lot of storms in that, then they began to think of, well, what did we do to cause these events in the world? And I mean, we know through biology and geological science that, my goodness, the world terrible events happen, earthquakes happen, things happen. Certainly we invest in them with global warming and other things, but ultimately there are things that are beyond our control. When you have a plane with so many people crash, when you have a boat that capsized, when you have Puerto Rico with their earthquakes, mudslides, when you have in the Philippines right now, they're going through the volcanic eruptions. So you have all those events, and we want to make meaning with them. Does it mean that we're coming to an end? Does it mean that the world civilization is ending? Well, I mean, civilization may or may not end, but it means that we live in a world that is constantly shifting. We have tectonic plates that cause earthquakes. We have various ocean currents that create tornadoes and various things like that. And then you have governments and political events that cause devastation to human lives. And does that mean that I cease to be human? Does it mean that it's trying to tell me that I should hide under my bed for the rest of my life? Of course not. But it does mean that we're aware of the fact that many people in this world don't have it as good as we do. And that there is suffering. And it doesn't matter what the religion is. And I know you said don't talk about religion, but it
no politics,
takes
no
in the religion.
And no sports.
But it doesn't matter your religious view, your humanistic view, your ethical view. You're always going to come to the problem of evil. Why does evil happen? Why does dark things happen in people's life?
I hear this a lot. Why does good things happen to
bad people?
Bad things happen to good people. Good things happen to bad people.
And that's Rabbi Kushner's book. Why do good things happen to bad people? Or why do bad things happen to good people? And I mean, he wrote the book basically about the death of his son. And how do you find meaning in that event? And you can't. I mean, there's no way to find meaning. But I think there is ways to look for the good. And what is the good? Well,
can we look through this? I want to do this like a practice.
Okay.
there's lots of people who are watching this right now, and they can benefit from this. Let's look at this particular event and see how we can find something good.
I would say that the good in this situation, aside from the tragic loss of life, is that the United States and Iran, based on their intense hatred for one another, have caused events that have led to a cataclysmic loss of life. It doesn't matter if it's democracy or if it's theocracy, which you have in Iran. Ultimately, power over people's lives can create tremendous hardships.
So where's the good in that?
The good in that is it awakens the rest of the world that this can't go on.
And I agree with you. And something that I noticed is right now there's a lot of eyes on what's going on.
Yeah.
So something good may come out of that.
Yeah.
Right? Okay.
And what it's done too is the expat communities have come together around the grief and supported one another.
Yes.
And that's a good thing.
That's a good thing. And I agree with you. I've seen a lot of people supporting each other. A lot of people sending messages of love and condolence and sympathy.
Yeah.
One thing I've noticed is that the Iranian community has come together stronger than ever. Really feeling that grief in each other and like holding hands and holding wakes and something that maybe I've never seen before. So this is a good thing.
Yeah. And we tend to demonize one another. Do I demonize the Ayatollah? Do I demonize the National Guard? Do I demonize Trump? Do I demonize the Republicans? At what cost? Ultimately, all we have the capability of doing is caring for ourselves and caring for others. I can't change the world, but maybe I can change one life.
Yeah.
And that's where you gain your power back. I don't have the capacity to change global events, but I certainly have the capacity to say, I'm really sorry that this happened in your community. And I'm really sorry that your community is hurting. And I hope that you sense from the Canadians that we support you and we're trying to do as much as we can. So that is a good thing, even though it's a tremendous tragedy.
Yes, that is a good thing. And so so I agree with you. It's important to always look for something that you can hang on to that can give you that sense of that I can find something.
But not so quick.
Okay.
There's an old saying that you have to sit in a diaper and smell it before it's time to change it. And I think a lot of time what happens with grief is we want to move on way too fast.
Okay.
And
how fast is too fast?
I think grief is at least a 2-year process.
2 years.
If not more, depending on the experience. So to say that, I'm going to have my life up and running within a year or within 2 years, because let's say the loss of a person, you have to deal with their birthday, you have to deal with holidays.
Yes.
You have to deal with memories. You have to deal with the fact that you have, if you're living together, you have to get rid of some of their stuff and be willing to do that. If you have children, how do you respond to your children now that you've had the loss of a partner? What if you're partners and you have the loss of a child? So it's very hard to say this is the timeline for what you're doing. And it's very hard to say this is where we're going to find the gold inside of this dark cloud. That's farther down the road. But I think the first thing that happens with grief is just allow yourself to feel.
Okay.
That it's okay to be sad, that it's okay to be shocked, that it's okay to be upset and angry. And to be angry at the universe, to be angry at your religion, to be angry at your faith, your government, that not enough is being done. Certainly that's normal. And if you look at any writings, religious writings or that, you will find within them these laments about sad things. So it can be included within our liturgies and within our life to be able to say, you know, this sucks. And nothing's ever going to make it right. How do you tell a parent whose child has just died and they say, why did this happen? What reason would ever make that better?
What would you say to a child?
If I knew the reason, would it make it any better?
If I knew the reason, would
Would it make it any better? And normally the response is no.
So I'm sure there's a lot of people who know someone who's grieving. Whether that grief is for someone like a friend or a family member through this tragedy. How does that person what is the responsibility of a friend to help someone who is in the grieving process?
That's a really good question. I think first off is to acknowledge that they're grieving. Oftentimes when something happens, I go, oh, it's not so bad. Get over it. And it makes the person feel that they can't be honest about the fact that they're sad, and it's disenfranchised. We do it with people who have miscarriages. Oh, you'll have another. Well, no, that was my baby. And especially with in vitro and that, people are recognizing that they're pregnant much, much earlier. And as human beings, we begin to build that life from very early conception. So to tell somebody that they can replace that life and it's just move on, of course not. So one is to acknowledge the grief. Second is to listen. Rather than talk them out of it, listen to their story. How is that for you? Tell me how you're feeling. Wow, I didn't realize it was that bad. And not put your timeline on them. Give them permission to not do things that they normally would want to do. And don't take it personally as an offense against you, but they may not have the physical and psychic energy to do it. And just to listen. All we need to do with one another is listen to our stories.
Just be there.
Just be there. You don't have to do very much. It's just a matter of sitting next to somebody and saying, tell me your story. Why are you sad?
So simple.
Well, yes, but we want to complicate things because our desire is to fix. I can't fix you.
Nobody can fix anybody.
Nobody can fix anybody, but we can listen. And when we listen, it acknowledges. And acknowledgement is such an important multi-tool because it says, I acknowledge that something's wrong with you, and that's okay. I'll stay here. And I'm not going to be a birthday clown and try to make you laugh or feel better. I will just stay here, and that's okay. You can be who you want to be.
That's true compassion.
That is. It's about compassion. It's about listening to people's stories. It's about I guess in the true sense of the word, it's about loving another person unconditionally when they're grieving. And that's okay. You're allowed to grieve. And I think the other important thing to encourage people to do when they're grieving is that it's okay to have a life outside of the grief. So because you laugh doesn't mean you're being disrespectful to the grief. Because you have fun doesn't mean you're disrespectful to the grief. Because you go back to work and you have to earn your money doesn't mean you're being disrespectful to the grief. And that as human beings, we can have opposites living together. We can feel happy about some things in our life and feel unresolved and unhappy about other things in our life. It doesn't have to be one or the other.
That's so good.
So we can live with that tension inside of ourselves.
Yes. So it doesn't have to be one thing or other. We can have our grief, which may take for a long time.
Yeah.
And it would come back to the surface every time we get reminded, or we see a picture, or we hear a song, or we talk about it, and we may shed a few tears. But it's also okay to still
Sure it is.
give ourselves the permission to live.
My aunt lived in the Maritimes, and I used to go down in the summer to visit her. And whenever I smell fresh baked bread, I'm in her kitchen.
Yes.
And I can smell those rolls coming out of the thing. That is a memory that's ingrained in me. But so is the memory of losing my mother. So is the memory of losing my father. So is the memory of other losses that I've had in my life. I don't wear them on my sleeve, but they're still part of who I am as a human being. So they're there. And at certain points in my life, when a grandchild is born or when I'm successful, certainly I would like my parents to be there. And, in some mystical way, perhaps they are. But the reality is you never lose touch with that connection you've had with someone who's been important in your life.
So essentially, that's grief.
Yes.
Because we hear grief, the term grief, and we automatically associate it with sadness. So I want to say that when you think about your aunt, if you've accepted that death is part of life, yes, of course, she's no longer with you, but you've accepted that. So what memory she brings to you is a positive memory.
Oh, it's the smell of baked bread.
Yes.
My grandmother,
So
if I smell, my grandmother, when I smell fresh baked beans that have been cooking over a whole day, I will smile.
Yes. Yes.
But there's other things that we have losses for in our life. What about the fact that perhaps we grew up in a family where our parents could be biological parents, but they couldn't be human parents?
Say again.
Let's say you're born in a family where your mother and your father are capable of having children, but they're not capable of being parents. So they're abusive. They're the roots that you have. They yell at you. They scream at you. They don't want you. You're never good enough. You can grieve the loss of those formative years.
Not having the kind of
parenting,
that you wanted.
Yeah.
Oh, I never looked at it that way.
Or grieve the loss of a life maybe as it might have turned out. But you can also flip that and go, but I'm the person I am today and the strengths that I have because of that experience.
Yes.
And you can hold that intention. You can resolve that grief for yourself by saying they had the capability of being biological parents, but because of the bruises in their life, they weren't able to be the nurturers. And I can own that tension. I can own that they gave me life, but I can lament that they couldn't give me the nurture that I needed in my life.
And the reason I am who I am today
is because I was able to move through those situations and resolve who I am.
That's interesting. So, part of what I've learned at Al-Anon is that people talk about their alcoholics and they are grateful for them. And so I really admire that sort of thinking, because if it weren't for my alcoholic, I wouldn't be the person I am today. And this kind of reminded me of...
Yeah, and I think it's also being able to rewrite the narrative of our life. I love narrative. I love the story. My favorite statement is, don't judge the story of my life by the chapter you're reading now.
Yes.
Because oftentimes, people will see us at certain chapters in our life and they don't recognize that it's just one chapter and there's more to be written and there's a tremendous history that goes behind it. And I think that part of grief work is allowing ourselves to tell the story and to tell the story and to tell the story till you can tell it in a way that is benign. You can tell it, but it doesn't mean that you're going to fall apart into a bundle of tears anymore.
Yes, yes.
So it becomes more and more benign. But for that to happen, I need to be able to tell you the story so that I can hear the story.
Yes. I see that in my own
life. So it's to be able to tell a story over and over again so that it becomes more benign. It's still the story, it's still all the same facts, but it doesn't ring your bell all the time. You don't resonate in quite the same way.
Well, you've gained a certain amount of power, knowing that has changed your life. Yeah. You're here today because of what happened, and now you are willing to share it and not feel that sadness anymore.
The difficulty with grief, though, is for those of us that have been through grieving experiences, we want to pull people through them quickly because we know what it's like to be at the other end.
Yes.
And we don't seem to have the patience for them to move through it at their own tempo.
You're right. That's a great point.
It's happy over here. Come on.
Yeah. Come on. You can get through this.
You can get through this. Come on.
Yes.
And it's like, no, it's their journey.
Such a good thing to
remember. And I think grieving is like playing snakes and ladders. You roll the dice and you may go up a bit, and then you hit a snake and you come down a bit. And it's this whole thing of moving through the board of life, but recognizing that it's not just going up or going down. There's going to be ups and downs in that movement of grieving, no matter how long the experience has been in your life.
So it's important to accept each other wherever they are.
Yep.
Yes.
The other thing is something that I think is important is called compound grief.
Tell me about that.
Let's say you've lost a job. 2 weeks later, your mother dies. A couple of weeks later, somebody else happens. Another thing happens. And all these griefs happen. What happens is you never get the opportunity to totally grieve one experience. It's these movements. And what compound grief, normally what's important is to go back and say, okay, let's choose one experience and let's work through it. Then let's choose another experience and let's work through it. Because what happens is the other losses on top that build up tend to sabotage the grieving processes for the other events. So you need to sort of move yourself back. How can I feel about losing a job when I'm still dealing with a diagnosis that was given to me 5 weeks ago, or a death that was a year ago? So the compound grief experience is to allow yourself, once you're stable in whatever aspect, to go to with a friend or a therapist to go back and say, let's talk about some of those losses.
Oh, this is so good. Because so what happens is when we're in that sort of period of our lives where it seems like we're being hit with this, that, we automatically decide that we're a victim in this situation. And this is so good. This is like taking ownership.
It is.
Taking responsibility for
your own story.
Yes. And now you can get out of that victimhood mode and go and get help.
It's like me saying, my God, I have a terrible life. Would you stop writing my story?
Yes.
Yeah, I got up this morning, oh gosh, what did they write on my story today? Whereas, yes, things have happened to me, but how do I respond to them?
Yes.
And it's the choosing to respond rather than we will react. I mean, that's the first response anybody has. But then how do you move through life in those circumstances? And also with the self-compassion that we're going to make mistakes. We're human beings. I love the line in the Leonard Cohen song where it says, "Speak to me like a lover does." We're so capable of complimenting other people, but we can't speak to ourselves with the voice of a lover. an experiment I'll ask those that are watching to do is go to the mirror, look yourself in the eyes and say, I love you.
And not everybody can do that.
Not everybody can do that because we don't know how to do that for ourselves. So when we get into experiences of loss or negativity or whatever, we don't know how to sit down and go, hold on, I'm human, this is okay, everybody go through these experiences. I may need a little help, but I'm going to get through it. And the first place I'm going to get through it is by saying, this is a really human thing for people to happen. So when a plane crashes in Iran, it's very normal for the world to go, oh my God. When a child drowns, oh my God. When something happens, to have those experiences, but to recognize that the appropriate grief for someone close to me expiring versus a global event, we may have to say, well, I realize that's happening, but I've also got to recognize that I have no control over doing this. So we have to start with the circles of our own control, because if we work outside of those circles, we expend so much energy trying to fix things that are not within our realm of possibility.
Yeah. You said expire, and that's interesting to me. So why did you choose that word, expire?
Died, expired. I think we use a lot of euphemisms for death. Well, we were talking before, and we all say, when I die, or if I die.
Yeah, that's true.
But the reality is, the word is, when I die.
Yeah.
Because we will all die, whether it's 115 or at 15.
But I like the word expire. I think that...
And we're past our best before date.
Yes,
that's right.
Exactly.
Take us out of the refrigerator and put us away.
I like expire. When people come to you, Don, when they're grieving, and they come to you, what sort of stages do you go through to help them?
I usually do one-ofs because there's a lot of other groups like Evergreen Hospice, Durham Hospice, Newmarket has a grief group at the hospital here as well. What I do is I try to understand why they're stuck in their grief and what's going on. So I want them to tell me the story of that experience, and I want to help them to get to a place where they can see openings of movement. Because oftentimes we get stuck and we don't know what to do. So the feeling is so intense. How do we get beyond that feeling? How do we get beyond moving in that experience? And it's helping a person find in that grief experience a little way of moving towards light, or moving towards understanding, or moving towards compassion. So it's really listening to the story and then helping them in their story to find ways that they can gain movement again. Because normally there's so much emotion, they don't know what to do with it. And oftentimes they're not giving themselves permission to do it. I met someone the other day and they basically said, I've been crying for a week. I said, oh, good. And they looked at me like it was like I was going to scold them for. I said, no. I said, tears carry out antitoxins and a lot of things in the body and in your body. I said, when you're ready to stop crying, you'll stop. And it was almost like, and shortly after the tears dried up. But it's to have that affirmation that it's okay to feel.
Yeah.
We're not all Iron Man.
No.
And even Iron Man died.
Expired.
Expired. Well, past his best before date.
Oh, that's good. So, you're also a psychotherapist.
Yep.
Do you find that you use a lot of your knowledge in psychotherapy when dealing with grief?
Yep. And I like narrative. I love story. Mm-hmm. And the narrative approach is basically looking at life as a story. And how can you rewrite the narrative or redefine the narrative of your life so that you can move on? I'll tell you a story. My dad died when I was 4. So I grew up with a narrative in my life. I didn't have a dad. So when I'd go to school and the kids, and it'd be the first phase, what do your parents do? Oftentimes I would invent a dad in a story because I didn't want to be embarrassed as the kid who didn't have a father. So I told myself this narrative going along. One of my friends who we chatted for a long period of time said, well, but what about your mom? What did she do in this story? And then you look back in the narrative and I realized that my mom was both dad and mom. And she filled in a lot of the experiences, and she allowed me to be who I was as a person. But to do that, I had to switch the narrative. I had to switch the narrative by saying, oh, poor person, I had a terrible start in my life because I didn't have a father, this, and this happened in my life, to, yes, I didn't have a father, but I had a mother who was capable of being both parents for me, and because of that strength of character, a lot of the nurturing aspects of who I am are part of my life. So it's learning to switch the narrative for ourselves. It's like saying, well, my father abused me. That's true, but he also gave you genetic life. So I wouldn't be here because of that, but the nurturing I had to get in other places. So it's beginning to tell ourselves a story where we're not the victim, which is a word we've already came out, but that we can begin to see the story. And when my mother passed, I was so involved in the story of my father's loss that I needed to deal with that story before I could move into her loss, and begin to understand the story of her loss.
So how did you do that?
Through talking to somebody, and through telling the story, and through recognizing the threads in my story that I kept overlooking because I was stuck in a certain way of defining the narrative.
Talking to someone who has the know-how is so super important.
Sure it is. But it's even talking to a friend or going to a grief support group.
Yes.
Where you're with people who have gone through the experience so that when they say something, it's normalized.
And there is no shortage of all sorts of support groups.
No, and it's also maybe going to the library, to the section on self-help and grief, and picking up some of the books and reading the stories, because the books are becoming much more narrative focused.
This whole business of taking responsibility for yourself, that's powerful.
It is. But it's also recognizing that we can't do it alone. I think taking responsibility ourselves is powerful, but not the end all and be all, because I think we need to recognize that as human beings we need communities and we need relationships to sustain us.
Yes.
Oftentimes, the ultimate of narcissism is, I'm me and everybody else be damned, right? And that's isolation in the ultimate form. So we need to have individuals in our life that we can connect with, that can sustain us, that can challenge us, that can support us. And we need those relationships. And part of that is perhaps turning off social devices, social media, and finding times to begin to talk again.
Okay, that's right on. Don't turn off right now. But it's so true. Because earlier we talked about this.
Yeah.
And how is it that it's so in our face?
I think we gravitate towards technology. The difficulty with technologies is it tells us we're always on. I can pick up my cell phone at 1 a.m. and begin to look at what my day is going to be like or what yesterday's email was. I'm not always on. I don't have the capability of being on for 24 hours a day. And the other thing is they're distractions, and they distract us from our emotional baggage.
Explain that a little.
Okay, let's say I'm having a really rough day, or I can't get along with things, or my wife and I are having an argument or whatever. I can distract myself till the cows come home by playing games on my machine and everything else, and it distracts and numbs me. It's almost like eating sugar, eating pancake, whatever you want. Now we can do it with electronics. We can distract ourselves.
Yes.
And never have to deal with things, because we're always chasing these wonderful fantasy of ideas all over the place.
So what's happening to our emotional intelligence?
I think it's dumbing down in some aspects.
You're right.
Look at what are we dealing with now? It's what's a lie and what's truth on media. Our emotional intelligence, sometimes because of technology, is being dumbed down.
So how can we improve that? How can we make that better?
By making one of our New Year's resolutions that we disconnect for a while.
Read a book.
Read a book. Sit with ourselves. Meditate. Go for a walk. Connect with nature. Use the cell phone to take pictures rather than looking at pictures.
Yes.
Connect with beauty. Go to an art gallery. Travel. Do all those things.
Excuse me. And because of social media, now, and you said, as soon as something happens, we hear about it.
Yep. And we have the tremendous capacity for vicarious trauma. What is vicarious trauma? Vicarious means secondary, or feeling something secondary. So if I look, the best would be September 11th. We saw that airplane crash into the Twin Towers over and over and over. We saw the person jump from the building over and over and over. It had a numbing, horrific effect on the human psyche. A tremendous effect. And it just kept impacting us and impacting us and impacting us. Add to that all the other tragedies that we have in life. And it can be overwhelming.
And numbing.
Numbing, but overwhelming.
Don't you think
You're
so?
on overload.
Yeah, we see it all the time. All of a sudden, it's not that bad anymore.
It happened during the Vietnam War, where every night the Vietnam War was in the household, and eventually it was, you'd watch the war and then you'd watch, All in the Family. And the intensity of those events almost balanced each other out. We become numb to the violence and everything around us. And it's almost like growing up in an abused household, where we find other ways to cope in life.
So to counter this now, that's what I'm saying when I say take responsibility. That's what I mean. Because nobody's going to do it for you.
No, and it's recognizing that there will be terrible things happening in this world on a daily, on a monthly, on a yearly basis that we have no control over.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean that I can't hug my child.
Oh.
It doesn't mean that I can't go on a trip with my wife. It doesn't mean that I have to be paralyzed with fear because the world is falling apart. Life goes on.
Yes.
We are resilient as human beings. We have to make drastic changes with the environment and a lot of things, and that doesn't negate that, but it doesn't mean that we still can't be in the moment. And I think mindfulness teaches us that all we have is this moment. So what am I going to do with this moment, and how do I live this moment?
That's a big lesson.
Yeah. It's how to be mindful of the moment in spite of everything that goes on. And it's also shielding, having the responsibility as parents to shield our kids from some of the violence that's going on. So to maybe not watch certain parts of the news when our kids are very, very young, because they may not need to see those images of violence.
Amazing. So if someone was watching and needed a grief counselor, where would they go?
They could look up on the internet, Google grief counselor. Okay. They could probably talk to their local funeral home and ask if there's a list of counselors that they can connect with. Outpatient mental health units at the hospitals, most of the, my brain will kick in, most of the hospice provide grief counseling as well.
Is that a free service?
Some is free and some is paid.
Okay.
But again, what's the investment in our life?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hospice is generally free.
Okay.
I know that Evergreen Hospice, which is in Thornhill and in Markham, they do have drop-ins on Sundays where you can just drop into it, and then they do intakes for specific groups as well.
Okay. Yes, it's important to deal with this. This is something that can affect us potentially for a very long time.
Yeah, and I think secondary to grief is depression and anxiety.
Yes.
I think we can become very OCD in many ways, become furtive in our environment, that we're just so overwhelmed that we're always looking for when the next thing is going to come at us. So there's a variety of secondary psychological responses that can break into us, and depression being one of them. Numbness, exhaustion, profound sadness, an inability to feel good about life, feel good about yourself.
So apart from the self-care, which you mentioned earlier, meditating and making it a purpose to take care of yourself and trying to make yourself feel better, is really asking for help from a professional and attending support groups that really understand you.
I'd say giving ourselves permission to get help. That it's okay. We're not a failure if we need someone to help us. It's part of learning how to do things.
Yes. And you never know how you opening up could help someone else.
Well, what did I read the other day? That when you finally get to the point in your life where you tell your story and you feel good about it, that story becomes healing for somebody else.
Yes. I totally believe that. When I started opening up about my story, it was when I started feeling better, and I hear it helped a lot of people. So there's so much truth in that.
Yeah, I'm very open about the fact that I suffered major depression in my life. I figure, if I hide it, how can I work with people that feel no good about it? If I can't own it in my own life, how can I tell you to own it in your life? But we're so stigmatized by things of the brain that we don't fully want to go there. But I mean, the brain is like the heart, it's like the liver, it's like the kidney. It's an organ that things can happen to it.
Yes. So, I'm an advocate for mental health, and I know you are too, because you do all these wonderful presentations. So maybe that could be a topic for a different day. If I could,
we can probably do the
here.
spring.
Yes.
A spring mental health checkup.
That would be great.
There we go.
That would be great, because I know you'll have a lot of information for people who may not even want to talk about it.
Yeah, a spring mental health checkup.
That sounds good.
Yeah.
I'm holding you to that.
Oh, there you go.
That's awesome. So we've been talking for about 55 minutes.
Woo!
I know, time flies when you're having fun. When I'm having fun. So I want to thank you for being here.
Oh, you're more than welcome.
If people need your information, is that something we can provide to them?
Yeah, you can put my email up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. We can do that, certainly. I want to thank everybody for watching. As always, this is Dela's voice, hoping to spark your soul. Ciao. Thank you, Dela.